They were never supposed to be found. The 107 crosses, small, wooden, carved by hand, each one bearing the name of a child and a date that was never meant to be remembered. Buried beneath the floor of a chapel long forgotten, under a church the world was told never existed. Saint Eulalia orphanage was not an orphanage, it was a gate, and what passed through it was not life, it was sacrifice. In the winter of 1887, when workers began unearthing the foundation of the ruined structure, they thought they were rebuilding. What they uncovered was the fracture of something older. The names were clear. The wood was aged, but preserved. Each cross identical. Each child accounted for. But here's the truth that forced the diocese to act within hours. The church's own records showed exactly 107 children had ever lived there, and now 107 tiny graves, hidden under a chapel floor. The question was never where they went. It was what had been done to them, and why. The church's response was swift. Too swift. Evidence confiscated. Construction halted. The site destroyed. A 7-page NDA, and a briefcase full of cash for every witness. The secret was reburied. But something didn't stay buried. And it never does when the foundation itself is rot. This isn't just about an orphanage. This is about a system, a structure. One that survives by shaping your mind, breaking your instincts, and calling it salvation. The children weren't just victims. They were participants in something older, something sacred only to those who understood the cost of power. You were taught it was charity. But what if it was ritual? We begin in the town of Millbrook, Pennsylvania, a town that no longer appears on most modern maps, a town founded by piety but swallowed by secrecy. And inside that town stood a man who believed obedience was worth more than life, Father Heinrich Kellerman. This video will show you how institutional compassion was weaponized into a tool of control, how obedience was extracted not for virtue, but for silence, and how those who cry out often vanish under the weight of what they've uncovered. What you are about to hear is dangerous, because once you hear it, you cannot return. Once you see how deep this deception runs, you will begin to see it everywhere, even in your own life. Stay, listen, and be warned, the bell still tolls. It started slowly, as true horrors always do. A child here, a child there, quietly removed from sight. Some said they were adopted. Others said they'd been called away by God. But no names were ever listed in the town registry. No farewell ceremonies. No belongings left behind. Just absence. Dr. Thomas Whitmore, the town's only physician, found it odd that in 17 years he was never summoned to treat a single child from Saint Eulalia. Millbrook was rife with fevers, infections, malnourishment. But the orphanage? A fortress of health, supposedly overseen by Sister Margaret's medical expertise. But Whitmore, a rational man, kept his thoughts to himself. You didn't question the church in Millbrook. You attended. But there were signs. A dress shop owner who claimed a young girl came in barefoot, bleeding, trying to speak, but unable to form words. A merchant who noticed Sister Bernardet's hands were always raw, her nails blackened, her eyes vacant. A carpenter who repaired the chapel floor and reported strange stains beneath the altar, circular, reddish-brown, impossible to sand clean. Still, no one acted, because Kellerman's sermons grew more powerful. He preached that suffering was divine currency, that every pain endured here on earth was a deposit in heaven's bank. People left his church weeping, trembling, believing. And belief is the greatest weapon. When people believe, they don't question. They defend the very thing destroying them. But the children knew. Timothy Fletcher saw it in their eyes the day he entered the chapel by mistake. They were hollow, kneeling, trembling, like lambs at the edge of a blade. And in Sister Margaret's arms, something wrapped in cloth squirmed, a movement that suggested life. A baby, a creature, or simply a soul not yet broken. Timothy ran, but he never spoke, not until 60 years later, when his breath grew shallow, and his dreams turned to screams, and still the town did nothing, because what they feared more than the truth was being cast out of the lie. The church taught them to fear hell, but it never told them it could be built in wood and stone, with stained glass windows, with hymns, with the illusion of grace. Saint Eulalia was not a sanctuary. It was a machine, one designed to transmute innocence into silence, life into obedience, and obedience into power. By 1837, the transformation was complete, not of the orphanage, but of the children. What arrived as spirited, broken little souls, crying, fighting, questioning, was now something else, something terrifyingly obedient. They no longer spoke unless spoken to. They prayed with hands bloodied from kneeling on stone. They confessed sins they had never committed. You must understand, this was not discipline. This was not religion. This was psychological engineering. Father Kellerman was no longer interested in charity. He was conducting an experiment, an ancient one, buried in medieval manuscripts and banned papal decrees. He believed in a forgotten concept, the cultivation of sacred vessels, that through ritualized suffering, human beings, especially children, could be hollowed out and filled with divine force. Not love, not salvation, but raw, spiritual potency. His journals, discovered in fragments long after the orphanage was razed, describe a chilling process he called exinanitio Dei, the emptying of the self to make room for God. But what Kellerman was really doing was something else. Not making room for God, but for control. Each child's individuality was extracted, identity erased, then replaced with absolute obedience. A few resisted, but they didn't last long. They vanished without burial, without record, and their names were the first etched on the wooden crosses beneath the chapel. The rituals intensified, midnight processions in the snow, silence enforced with starvation, children locked in the cellar with only scripture carved into the walls and Gregorian chants echoing from the upper floors. They weren't allowed to sleep at night during certain liturgical cycles. Instead, they knelt until they collapsed. And still, the town watched and said nothing, because Kellerman fed their spiritual hunger. He was a confessor, a prophet, a holy man who made their suffering feel meaningful. He told them God was watching, that every trial they endured made them worthy. They believed it, because it's easier to believe you're being purified than to accept you're being controlled. This is how power works, not through violence, but through belief, through symbols, rituals, language that hijacks your guilt and replaces it with devotion. Saint Eulalia didn't just mold children. It molded a model of how institutions could break a soul, rebuild it, and make it grateful for the pain. That model would echo through other orphanages, asylums, schools, even prisons. And it started with a bell that never stopped ringing. There was one room in Saint Eulalia that no child ever spoke of, not even in their final days. It was known only as the Red Room, not because of its color, but because of what was done there. Located in the basement behind a locked iron door, it had no windows, no crosses, no altar. Just a stone floor, a single chair, and a drain. It wasn't for punishment. It was for transformation. Every child, by their 13th birthday, was brought there. Alone. No food, no blanket. They weren't told why. They were simply led down the stairs by Sister Bernadette, whose soft humming masked the metallic rattle of keys. Once inside, the door closed, and no sound escaped. Those who emerged were never the same. Their eyes looked through you, not at you. They flinched at sunlight. They moved with a slow, measured precision, as if they were no longer guessing what to do, but obeying an internal script written by something else. Some didn't speak for weeks. Others began speaking in Latin they had never been taught. But all of them shared one thing: absolute silence about the room. What happened inside the Red Room remains undocumented. But according to one recovered letter from Sister Catherine, sent in secret to her cousin in New York, it involved sacred reversals, ritualized starvation, and baptism not with water, but with fire. She begged her cousin to come for her, that she had witnessed a child made into something unnatural. The letter never arrived. It was intercepted. Sister Catherine disappeared 2 weeks later. Her absence was never explained. But her notes survived, hidden inside the false lining of her trunk. She wrote of Kellerman's obsession with ancient texts, books bound in calfskin and written in Proto-Latin, detailing rites used in early heretical sects, practices thought extinguished by the Inquisition. And yet, Kellerman had them, and he used them. By 1840, Saint Eulalia was no longer an orphanage. It was a factory, a place where broken children were repurposed into living relics of obedience, not just for Millbrook, but for the church. A traveling bishop who visited in 1841 described the children as divinely subdued, like angels made flesh through discipline. He blessed the institution. He funded its expansion. That is how the machinery spreads, not through resistance, but through reverence. They saw obedience and called it holiness. They saw trauma and called it faith. They saw silence and mistook it for peace. But silence is not peace. Silence is what remains when the scream has been beaten out of you. The first real breach came not from a whistleblower, but from a fire. In 1847, lightning struck the bell tower during a midnight storm. The sky roared as if something had had enough. The tower collapsed inward, crashing through the chapel roof, splintering pews, smashing the altar into ruin. And for the first time in 13 years, the children ran. Not in panic, but in instinct, as if something ancient had just released its grip. 3 children escaped that night. Only one made it to the edge of town. Her name was Eliza Marine, 11 years old, her feet bloodied from the broken glass, her hands wrapped tightly around a cloth-bound object she refused to let go of. She collapsed on the porch of the Whitmore residence. Dr. Thomas Whitmore, long suspicious, long silent, took her in. She didn't speak for 4 days. On the 5th day, she whispered a single phrase in Latin, Nos sacrificium sumus. We are the sacrifice. What followed were fragmented accounts, images, not narratives. A wooden mask kept in a velvet box, a candle that never extinguished, a name scratched into stone behind the altar, not of Christ, but of something older. Domina Luxor. No saint bears that name, No scripture claims it, but it appears, again and again, in Kellerman's journal, always followed by a single word: offerant. They offer. Dr. Whitmore tried to alert the mayor. He wrote to the bishop. He was ignored. Within 2 weeks, the church had arrived, not to investigate, but to erase. Saint Eulalia was declared structurally unsound. The children were relocated, no names listed, no addresses. The building was demolished brick by brick. The remaining nuns sent to remote locations across the Northeast. Kellerman himself, gone. No funeral, no grave. Only a sealed box of belongings returned to Bavaria, never opened again. But here's what they missed. Eliza survived, and what she carried, wrapped in that cloth, was not a relic. It was a journal. Sister Catherine's. Every ritual, every name, every symbol, preserved. It's real. It exists, and parts of it, translated, authenticated, now sit locked in a private archive, leaked once, swiftly buried, but not forgotten, because once a system like this is built, it doesn't vanish. It evolves. It modernizes. The robes change. The language softens. But the core remains. Break the child, mold the soul, extract the obedience. And that obedience is power. Transferable. Contagious. Think this was just one orphanage? Look closer at the institutions around you. You've been told it was charity. You've been taught to see the cross as mercy, the robe as virtue, the sermon as truth. But what if that cross was a cage? What if the robe was a uniform for psychological warfare? And what if the sermon was a spell? Saint Eulalia was not an exception. It was a blueprint. The church didn't bury it because it was shameful. They buried it because it worked. The structure, the silence, the obedience. These weren't failures of faith. They were its hidden engine. Because to command souls, you don't need violence. You need guilt, ritual, repetition, isolation. The same tools that turned free-thinking children into hollow-eyed devotees are still in use today, in systems all around you. Think about it. Why are you taught obedience before critical thinking? Why is suffering framed as noble? Why do you feel shame for your instincts, your impulses, your questions? These aren't accidents. They're installations. They're installed early, reinforced often, and protected at all costs. The institutions evolve. The methods modernize. Now it's not a bell that tolls. It's a screen that pings. Now it's not a red room in a basement. It's a cubicle, a classroom, a church pew, a social feed. Every arena where your behavior is shaped, measured, and molded is part of the same legacy. Saint Eulalia was just the beginning. The 107 children weren't lost. They were used, their obedience extracted, their energy turned into myth, their silence weaponized. And what did it buy? Influence, favor, control. The kind that doesn't just run a parish, but steers a society. This is the part they'll never teach you in school. The true function of sacred institutions was never salvation. It was domination through narrative, control through belief, ownership through guilt. And the moment you start questioning that, the moment you see it, they label you dangerous. But theirs, it is power in seeing, and there is power in remembering. If you've made it this far, you're no longer a passive witness. You are a fracture in the system, a crack in the foundation of controlled history. Comment: the bell tolls for me, again, and let the algorithm know we are not sleepwalkers. We are watchers, We are waking because some stories don't end. They echo through blood, through memory, and through men brave enough to hear what was never meant to be heard. There's one final truth they never anticipated, one last thread in this dark tapestry that even the architects of Saint Eulalia couldn't control. Memory doesn't die. It waits. The 107 children are gone. Their names scrubbed from record. Their graves hidden, desecrated, denied. But memory remains. In the land, in bloodlines, in dreams passed down like curses through generations who never knew why they woke screaming, in journals buried behind walls, in letters that slipped through cracks in the system, and now, in you. Because you've heard the story, and that makes you part of it. You're holding a mirror to a forgotten machine, a machine that still functions, not just in churches, but in every institution that tells you to sit still, speak softly, and obey. Millbrook was erased. The town dissolved, records expunged. But why? Not because it was haunted, because it was a seed, and seeds that grow too well must be burned before others ask what was planted. But traces remain, hidden symbols etched into cathedral stonework that no one can translate, obscure Latin phrases in archived sermons across the Northeast, orphanages with no alumni, baptismal records with no births, places where something passed through and was never meant to leave. And yet, here we are. You, still watching, still listening. And them, still listening too. Because trust this, systems like these watch the watchers. They monitor what we remember, what we question, what we dare to speak aloud. That's why this story matters. Not just for the children who never got to speak, but for the man you're becoming. The one who does speak. Because once you see how obedience is manufactured, you can no longer kneel in ignorance. You start asking who benefits from your submission, who thrives on your silence. And once those questions take root, you become something they fear, not just informed, but so virane. That's the legacy they tried to erase. Not just the children, but what the children could have become if they were never broken. Free minds, strong wills, dangerous men like you. So hear this, and let it brand you. You are not here by accident. You are not who you were 8 minutes ago. And you will not be who they wanted you to be. Comment again. The bell tolls for me. Let them know we're not forgetting. We're remembering. Loudly. The children are gone. But the silence is over.